Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching.
The non-industrial countries of the world used to be backward but self-sufficient. Now they are backward and dependent, with every baby born pushing them closer to catastrophe. The third world, this time on the Western tradition.
And now UCLA professor Eugen Weber's continuing journey through the history of Western civilization.
Last time we ended on a note of turnabout. In the second half of the 20th century, the capitalist West was becoming more socialist. The Soviet world was becoming more like the old Tsarist regime it was meant to replace. And there was even a resurgence of National Socialism, especially in the former colonies of the West. One of the great novelties of the post-war era has been the appearance and the progressive self-assertion of this so-called Third World, born of the dissolution of Europe's colonial empire. More than 50 new republics have joined the ranks of the United Nations since 1945. By 1974, the only colonial empire left to Europe was that of Russia. The current colonial holdings of France or Britain are scarcely worth mention in comparison with those of countries like China, South Africa, Indonesia, or even the Sudan. Europe's age of territorial imperialism seems to be over, and that itself is a remarkable change. But the colonial enterprises of the past have left their mark behind them. Whether they came to heal, teach, order, or exploit, the Europeans were bound to revolutionize when they did not destroy the societies, peoples, cultures that they touched. But whatever motives moved the European empire builders, they were responsible for training the leaders and inspiring the ideologies that have challenged Westerners and then displaced them. On the one hand, the need of the industrialized nations to interfere with those less developed, as England did with India, this need increased as communications shrank the world and trade tied its disparate parts together. Without the colonies' markets, and especially their products, the industries of the West were likely to run down. On the other hand, more backward countries could only hope to match their exploiters in wealth and power by developing capital, skills, value systems from the West. That is, by facilitating even greater foreign meddling in and control of their affairs. The West could not be kept out without Western techniques. and those techniques could not be acquired without bringing in the West. That was the quandary. But some actions of the West, even if they were intended to be benevolent, could have dire effects if they were based on an inappropriate estimate of what was good. Condensed milk for babies, solid meals for starving men and women, cold water for the overheated, these can hurt or kill. Similarly, so can constitutions and other alien imports. You cannot introduce machines and factories without implicit concepts of what man can or should do. You cannot introduce social services without attendant ideas of what man needs and what man is. One materialism ushers in another. One ideology elbows out another and imposes itself. European ideas concerning property, for instance, proved as much a dissolvent to third world cultures as European arms and techniques. When lands which had been held and worked in common were split up and treated as private, separate pieces of property subject to sale, transfer, mortgage by one particular owner, then tribal or communal forms of land tenure were dissolved, and with them the societies, the crafts, the tribes which had evolved structures quite different from those of the West. Like land, labor also had to be brought in line with European concepts and European needs. Older forms of labor organization were replaced, sometimes forcibly, by money wages, open markets, regular hours, above all by the notion of work as an ethical value rather than merely a demanding necessity. Where Europe took 500 years to live the evolution from Middle Ages to modern world, African and Asian societies were forced to live it in a couple of generations. Money replaced barter or subsistence. Exchange replaced self-sufficiency. Tens of millions who had seldom or never used currency were initiated into its delights or pressured by taxes and other obligations into cash-producing activities. Efficiency replaced haphazardness. Secularization replaced traditional magic observances. Laws and administration replaced custom. Impersonal bureaucracies replaced face-to-face relationships. Some of this was an improvement, all of it was upsetting. One society after another was affected by alien concepts generally applied with little understanding of the historical background or the stability provided by existing practices. People who had operated time out of mind as parts of customary cultures were introduced to the possibilities and the insecurities of change. They really could not challenge their new masters. But the colonial process is not as simple as it is often painted, and it does not operate in one direction alone. The occupier does not simply rule the occupied, he infiltrates their consciousness, their lives, their culture. He takes hold of them inside and out. Indians and Nigerians often want to be English gentlemen. All this indicates the possibility that technological society did not destroy values as such, but rather suggested new values. What you see in 19th and 20th century colonial history is an accelerated version of European history. Contract replaced tradition. The free-moving, free-wheeling individual replaced the static family or tribe. Democracy, with all its drawbacks and opportunities, replaced the stable hierarchies of status and birth. Changing legal structures transformed society and social attitudes. Technological innovations turned congeries of provinces into countries, spread modern skills, suggested the revival of native industry and enterprise in a new guise and on a new scale. And just as in Europe, all this has provided more efficient modern means for age-old tendencies to exploit, to oppress, and to murder your enemies en masse. But because the whole world is at our doorstep, we can see that time has not unraveled at the same rate for people in every country. We are haunted by the disparity between the advanced countries and all others, the imbalance between the industrialized West and North and the agrarian remainder of the world. Today, a glance across the world reveals extraordinary differences. Unlike 200 years ago, when generally speaking, most people everywhere still lived approximately in similar circumstances. Today's differences are more on a scale of time than space. Behind this lies the fact that while all the world advances, its most advanced areas advance the fastest. Europe and North America, which have less than 30% of the world's population, produce 80% of its income. And Europe continues to consume the greatest share of the surplus foods and raw materials of the world, and to provide the leading exporters of manufactured goods, just as she had done in 1900. Asia, Africa, Latin America are increasing their production too, but not nearly as fast. And they are not making lots of money from selling raw materials to Europe either, because a great change, another great change, has occurred. The largest amount of trading takes place between the industrial nations themselves instead of between the industrial nations and their former colonies. Europe and the United States take less of the world's raw materials now than they did 70 years ago. So primary producers in Asia, in Africa, in South America, with their rubber and their oil and their tin, do less trade. And they do it on worse terms than before because demand for their products is shrinking or is only being maintained by artificial means. A country like Ghana produced more cocoa in 1964 than it did in 1954, but it earned less than half what it had earned a decade before. And since the 1973 oil crisis, the situation has only grown worse. In 1970, the beef from one African cow could pay for 1 barrel of oil. Now it takes 8 cows to buy a barrel of oil. Non-industrial economies used to be backward, but self-sufficient. Now, They are backward and dependent, which makes them more unstable than the industrial economies on which they depend. That is especially true when a country depends on a single product. All in all, over a score of countries still depend on a single product for over half of their export trade, and they lead a precarious existence, teetering on the brink of catastrophe with every oscillation of world commodity prices. At the same time, these economies have been caught between soaring demand for modern goods and insufficient supply. The result has been crippling inflation. Between 1958 and 1968, the cost of living index went up from 100 to 149 in India, 202 in Ghana, 879 in Argentina, 2,260 in Brazil, all countries where anachronism and modernization are at odds. In my first lecture, I quoted Voltaire about history being only a pack of tricks that we play on the dead. How often, one may ask, is history a pack of tricks that the dead play on us and we play on each other? And we become aware of them as one hidden mine after another goes off unexpectedly under our feet. Overpopulation might be one of history's most fiendish tricks. Modern sanitation techniques and disease control had such a dramatic effect on underdeveloped nations that the population growth which occurred over several centuries in the West took less than a decade in certain Asian and South American countries, far faster than the economy and means of production could adjust to the conditions this created. The continents least able to bear it find their population rising fastest. Asia, with 50% of the world's population, has 11% of its revenues. Men and women have multiplied for thousands of years to reach the 5 billion mark. Short of catastrophe, they'll double that in 40 years. And yet most of these masses, who are no longer powerless or silent, who grow in number because of the West's medical advances, cannot afford the West's comforts, machinery, or nourishment. Discontent can spread more rapidly than prosperity. As Nehru once remarked, what is new in India is not misery, but the consciousness the Indian people has of it today, and its impatience to be free of it. Yet, whilst an American farmer can feed 44 persons, a Frenchman 12, a Russian 5, the average producer in an undeveloped country can generally feed only himself properly, at best one other person. It takes 15 Indian cows to give as much milk as one American cow, 7 acres of Vietnamese rice paddy to harvest the same quantities as those produced by 1 acre in Australia. Unfortunately, there's little reason to think that the hungry countries, whose population by 2000 AD will be over 5 billion, 4/5 of the total projected for the whole planet, that these countries can be modernized fast enough to keep them from becoming a miserable, suffering, explosive sore. The greater the population, the less likely their living standard is to improve. The less the living standard improves, the less chance there is of lowering the birth rate. The greater the population pressure on available resources, the fewer resources can be spared to increase productivity, to improve living conditions, and to create possibilities and attitudes conducive to limiting the population.
The area of the world's cultivated lands can be tripled, productivity greatly intensified. A fuller, more balanced diet might even cut down the population growth. Recent studies suggest that hungry societies whose diet is deficient in proteins may be particularly prolific, while protein-rich diets reduce the fertility rate. It's also possible to bring the birth rate down to compensate for a lower death rate. And it is possible to enlist science in solving the problems of subsistence, production, and population. But capital and technology depend on human attitudes and human decisions. In this regard, the 1980s have witnessed remarkable strides in India and China, but equally remarkable retrogression in other places. 30 years after colonial rule, African states are more dependent than ever on foreign assistance. Every fifth sack of grain the Africans will eat is imported. So are the armaments, which account for far more money than goes to their living standards. As usual, political decisions command material possibilities. Cultural and ideological orientation affects and directs the uses of the means at society's command. And so, while the hungry and backward countries challenge the industrialized West to aid them even more, they also accuse it of ignoring or destroying their peculiar culture and their values. The aid has become both problem and solution. It condemns as it saves. The story of the Third World also emphasizes something else, the sheer brevity of colonial imperialism. In the last 3 centuries, Europeans conquered much of the world, they settled it, they set their mark on it with their culture and technology, but they didn't need colonies to do this. And the colonial age was a very brief episode in the history of the West. Colonies, remember, were a very uneconomic way of exploiting people. But even this brief interlude had a dramatic, often devastating effect on the Third World, which had barely changed for thousands of years.
As for the West, much of what happened in the last 100 years has proved as short-lived as the colonial age. Much is being abandoned, much is being reversed. Literacy, for example, which was so hard to achieve and only generalized around 1900, literacy is now seeping away. We're returning to the oral and visual culture of our forefathers. Law and order that proved so hard to establish are also cracking. Life used to be precarious, then it became a little less precarious in the late 19th century. In the late 20th century, it grows more precarious again. And while material uniformity grows, cultural uniformity, another recent achievement, cultural uniformity wanes. Even national unity is being challenged by particularisms reasserted. Linguistic in Belgium or Canada, national in Brittany and Wales and Catalonia and Yugoslavia, cultural and ethnic in countries like the United States. The long trend to greater centralization, to greater authority, is being reversed in the West, although, of course, not in the rest of the world. And the shorter trend, which for 3 or 4 centuries tried to impose standards of reason and rational discourse, this is meeting strong competition from the sciences, the arts, and the politics of irrationality. It's hard, after all, to be rational in an irrational world. It is not rational. So we're going back to earlier situations which our forefathers fought hard to alter and overcome. And whatever else this means, it suggests that historical experience is not a linear progression, it's rather a meander, a river in whose waters you can never step twice, of course, but also one whose curves ever approach each other and ever flow through new, unexpected territory. Next time, the technological revolution. Until then.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching. For information about this and other Annenberg CPB programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.